Tuna, let's start with a blunt question. How bad is it?
Good morning, Tom, and thanks for having me. I think it's fair to say that the hotel and hospitality industry has been in the eye of the storm, the COVID-19 disruption, and not just in the U.S., but across the world. This is something that no one could, foresee. And even as we speak, the latest data points are pointing to still very, very difficult challenges on the potential road to recovery. But we see several hotels going about and trying to navigate this unprecedented disruption. And as everything else, Tom, I think there could actually conceivably be those companies that consolidate their market share gains and emerge, relatively speaking, winners versus others that could be more severely impacted.
The hospitality industry apocalypse is crushing down some of the most iconic hotels across the country. In the absence of new stimulus relief, the hotel sector is set up for failure. Dramatic declines in occupancy rates and revenues brought on by the sanitary outbreak have mired hotel owners in a liquidity crisis, leaving thousands of hotel owners struggling to pay employees and afford their commercial mortgages. Even though some of them received forbearance from their lenders, those periods are coming to an end, and now they're having to make some tough choices. Given that it's impossible to foresee when business activity will resume to previous levels, particularly in the hospitality sector, since social distancing measures are still lingering and a second surge of viral infections is right at the corner, a massive wave of hotel bankruptcy filings and foreclosures is permanently changing the landscape of this industry.
Question, when are they going to emerge? Do they have enough cash to wait until they emerge? And what will be the drawback to all of this debt they've incurred to future growth? I mean, how much have they built a bridge to nowhere?
Lisa, that's a great question. At this point, we think that emerging from this happens for the most part no earlier than the second, half of next year, even on the assumption that we're going to have some vaccines, relatively speaking, in the next 6 to 9 months. I think it takes another at least 6 to 12 months, variously, for the industry to begin to get any semblance of recovery. Now, the good news is that a lot of the hotels have already taken steps to mitigate the liquidity pressures that we are seeing across the industry. So the really biggest names, the chains like Hilton and Marriott and Wyndham and Hyatt are all very solid in terms of their liquidity position, raising additional debt, cutting dividends and share buybacks, managing their capex. So we really have no major liquidity constraints. The ones that are getting squeezed are relatively smaller mom-and-pop operators, less-known franchises, where we see the PPP Paycheck Protection Program having a relatively limited impact. So really, this is going to be interesting to see how it all shakes out.
So Hilton and Marriott may emerge the winners at the end of this pandemic. There's a question, though, about how much they're going to have to shrink their footprint in order to remain profitable. How much of their hotel portfolio do you expect them to contract at a time of growing commercial real estate angst?
Well, coming into this pandemic, I think the supply growth has been relatively modest, which has been actually accommodated by the pent-up demand. So I would say that the supply-demand balance was relatively rational. What has happened as a result of the pandemic is that most of the major chains have kind of pulled back on their development plans. So supply is going to be artificially constrained. But next year, we do believe that, especially in the second half, there's some pent-up demand that's going to try to restore that supply-demand balance, and may not be another 18 months or 2 years before we see that play out. So expect that there's going to be relatively little to moderate supply growth at this time until more chains become comfortable investing again and trying to expand their footprints.
Tuna, what does the industry get from the government? We understand that the airlines had substantial aid. The airlines are asking for more directed aid as well. What do hotels and hospitality do? Are they just in it by themselves?
The hotels and hospitality got nowhere near the kind of aid that the airlines got. And perhaps for a variety of reasons. I think that when you think about the hotel industry, it's a much more fragmented, right? Most of the big chains, the names that we just talked about, are actually mostly franchised, and you have these franchisees that really had to apply on their own for the aid. And what we're hearing is that it's so far had a very trickle-down effect and not as much of the pervasive type of impact you would like to see. So going forward, I think it may very well be, as Lisa had alluded to earlier, that you're going to see a lot of rationalization for some of these larger chains where the franchisees may not be able to provide a type of liquidity that's needed to kind of endure a prolonged period of disruption. So all fingers crossed here, trying to see how this all shakes out.